Hello everyone, I am the Weather Dude, welcome back, and today I'm going to be giving my 6th hurricane season forecast for the year 2023. We're going to talk about some more factors that have come together to potentially make this season even more active than we thought. As always, be sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss any future videos, and we're just going to get right into it here, starting with the sea surface temperature anomalies, which are still very warm, especially out in the eastern Atlantic. You can see off the coast of Africa there, and even by like the Cabo Verde Islands. Waters are like a couple degrees Celsius above average, but also one thing I'll be pointing out is closer to home, like the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. The waters are also, very warm, especially for this time of year. And if we look out in the Nino 3-4 region, of course, we got that building El Nino out there in the Nino 3-4 region, and in the Nino 1-2 region, which is kind of further east, we have very, very warm waters, like 5+ degrees Celsius above average off the coast there of South America. But if we look at the actual sea surface temperatures, you can see where they are boiling hot close to home. And I actually have some news to share with that, but that'll be in a couple of maps later. But yes, very warm waters above like 30 degrees Celsius there in the East Pac, off the coast of Mexico, even the Gulf of Mexico and in the Caribbean as well. But still, we got some pretty warm waters well into the 80s in the MDR region. And of course, that yellow line that I've been talking about, which is like that 75-degree line, that's like the absolute bare minimum that a tropical storm would need to start developing. That is, of course, continuing to move further to the north as the oceans warm up through the summer. Take a look at the trends over the last 7 days. Where have the sea surface temperature trends gone? Well, in the northern Gulf of Mexico, they've increased significantly. I would say a moderate increase in the Caribbean. Actually, in Nino 3-4 regions, we've actually seen some slight decrease, very slight though, like up to 0.5 degrees Celsius of a drop. But there's been some slight drop there. I would say out in the Eastern Atlantic, I'd say more of a less of an increase than in the Caribbean, more modest increase, if you will. But up and down the Eastern Seaboard, it's been trending up as well, which is something to note because a lot of tropical systems do track in that direction up the East Coast sometimes. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's go to windy.com here because their sea surface temperature map, we can pinpoint where the sea surface temperatures are and what the exact numbers are. And the news I have is that we have our first 90-degree reading, and you would think it's in the Caribbean, but no. It is in right there, right off the coast of New Orleans, near Biloxi. Right there, 90 degrees sea surface temperature. And of course, there's a good explanation as to why, the northern Gulf of Mexico especially has been heating up. And it's because that high pressure, that heat dome that's just been building over the southern part of the country. And of course, when you get all that sunlight and all that heat beating down on the water, it does take time because there is a lag time process, but it will eventually warm that water up. So that's kind of why we've really seen a warming. But also just in general, like the sea surface temperatures in general do warm this time of year. They do get warmer unless we see like a sweeping cold front come through. So this is definitely no surprise. We do see some 88-degree readings near Cuba, 89 even. Near Havana. Oh, there's another one. I didn't think there was another one. Near Havana, there's another 90-degree sea surface temperature reading. And I don't think there's any in the East Pac, at least not that I could find, 88 or so. So yeah, the Atlantic actually has the East Pac beat. That's crazy. Or at least the Gulf does, and the Caribbean. So yes, the 90-degree water. Now, again, it's not 90 everywhere, but it's mostly mid to upper 80s, I would say, is like widespread. But look at even the Gulf Stream, like 84, 85, even low to mid 80s, all the way up. Even to like the same latitudes as like Washington, D.C. That's how far north we're talking here. So, yes, the Gulf Stream is getting warm. The Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, really concerning because if something forms there, I mean, it is game on if a tropical system forms there. Even near the Bahamas, near Nassau, I saw an 89 reading. But out in the Atlantic here, out in the East tropical Atlantic near Africa, still, low to mid 80s. I would say it's definitely enough to form a hurricane if the other conditions like dry air and wind shear kind of keep themselves limited. I would say that's still pretty good for forming a tropical system. All right, so yeah, there's kind of like your MDR region. All right, so those are what your sea surface temperatures are looking like. Obviously, there are other factors that we're going to get into as well that we do not need to forget about. But let's take a look kind of like by region in general how things are looking. So the Gulf of Mexico is 1 degree Celsius above average. All right, as of the latest readings, you can see it's kind of gone up and down a little bit over the last few months. But the difference is that when it's 1 degree Celsius above average this time of year versus
maybe when it's 1.3 degrees Celsius above average in April, you're talking about very different numbers because on average, it is usually a lot warmer in July than it is in April. But still, a degree Celsius above average at this time, like if we were to be a degree Celsius above average in the Gulf by September, I mean, we'll be talking about like well into the 90s, I would even say, for sea surface temperatures because they already usually get to the mid upper 80s by September. If we look at the Caribbean, it's come down a little bit from early mid-June, where we're a degree Celsius above average, but still, we're still a half a degree Celsius above average. And again, we usually do get warmer as the months go on. We look at the MDR, about 0.6 degrees above average. And again, it's like an average of the entire section that they look at. The Northern Atlantic, over a half degree above average. So all these areas, these key areas that I highlighted, that we've gone through the Gulf, the Caribbean, the MDR, the North Atlantic, and finally the Nino 3-4 region. But those first four that I showed you are where tropical systems usually do move through. And of course, our Nino 3-4 index sitting at 0.8. So yeah, we're pretty much well in the El Nino territory at this point. And we're just going to keep steaming ahead as we have been ever since the beginning of the map here, which goes back to April. But it's been going up longer than that because we were in a La Nina for like the longest time, like the past few years. Looking at the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, we can see that they do keep a pretty strong El Nino in their forecast, upwards of 3 degrees Celsius above average. I don't know. I mean, they've been sticking to it. I don't think we'll get there if we do get to this like really strong El Nino territory. It wouldn't be till like the winter time, like December, January. They have us getting there by September. Like they think by September we're gonna have nearly 2.8. I don't think that's gonna happen. That is way too high, way too fast. I think we'll definitely maybe be like in a moderate El Nino by then, and maybe a strong one by the winter time. I feel like that's a more reasonable forecast because we will be continuing to trend up in the El Nino because there's nothing that says we're going to break this trend of as we head through the winter time. So again, you can see like the models playing out here. Here's July. Here we have August, all advancing to the right here. September, October. You can see the mean on the bottom here of your screen, the average of these 7 models. You can see November. And of course, the Bureau of Meteorology, of course, they have 3.2 degrees. Do you realize what kind of El Nino that is? 3.2. That's like, I don't think we've ever broken 3. So I don't really think that's going to happen. I would say, again, the rest of these models are a lot, maybe not the Meteo, but these other models I think are a lot more modest. The CANSIPS, the Euro, the JMA, the NOAA model, the UKMO. These are more reasonable, like moderate, borderline strong El Nino by November and into December. And you can see it only goes out to November. So looking at the Southern Oscillation Index here, so generally when we see values on this, when we generally see values of above 7, that's usually indicative of a La Nina, right? So above this line right here, 7, right? And there you can see over the past like 2 years or so, 2.5 years, we've definitely mostly been above that line because we've been in a La Nina. We've seen like a recent drop because we're going to transition to an El Nino, but it actually has shot up a little bit. Now we're a plus 1.0 on the latest 30-day value ending July 1st. So basically from June 1st to July 1st. So yeah, it has shot up recently. That doesn't mean we're going to go back to El Nino, because even if we were to briefly shoot back above this line, it goes up and down all the time. But it is indicative that maybe the El Nino growth might start slowing down or is slowing down, or the growth to El Nino, yes. So if we look at the trade winds, because usually if we look with an El Nino, we usually have strengthening of those trade winds. Or sorry, La Nina is strengthening and El Nino is reversing. Sorry, I think I had it right the first time. So La Nina, yes, is strengthening of the trade winds, and El Nino, they generally weaken or even reverse. So I think I was right the first time there. You can see the anomalies here for the trade winds you can see yellow and orange. That's above average anomalies here, and kind of like that Nino 3-4 region. So, those strengthening of trade winds maybe is something that's going to try and hinder that transition to El Nino. Right? And you can see they're still blowing in their general direction as well. I mean, they're weak. They're definitely weaker over here, but I would say they're closer to average, a little bit further to the west. And if we look at the tropical intensity index, right, you can see the Gulf of Mexico, because of those warm waters, and what I'm about to show you in a minute here, highly favorable for development. Even up in the Carolina coastline, we see favorable conditions. Not so much in the Caribbean. And there's a little spot here over in the Atlantic. But in general, the Gulf definitely looks to be lighting up right now. And here's the other reason I was just talking about as to why we got good favorability for tropical development in the Gulf. There's basically no dry air there, as well as the eastern seaboard, even the Caribbean. I mean, I would say there's a good, good puff of dry air out in the Atlantic, but again, it's normal for early July, right? And once that makes its way out of here, I'm sure this region will start to quiet down in the MDR with dry air as well. So definitely something. All these maps look very concerning, especially because we're in an El Nino. You would think the season would be kind of bad and inactive, but it's certainly not looking like that so far. We look at total precipitable water, right? How many you'll get that moisture in the atmosphere. We definitely see some high precipitable water valleys with these tropical waves that come off of Africa. We even got some high amounts there. It doesn't look very concentrated in the Caribbean or in the Gulf, but we definitely do have a lot of areas of moisture and thunderstorms that definitely need to be looked at pretty closely because we have very high amounts of precipitable water there. I believe this was actually taken just an hour ago. If we look at the oceanic heat content, right? Again, not just sea surface temperatures like we were looking at, but this is looking at, below the ocean surface where the hurricanes or tropical systems, whatever they may be, tap into that energy. And you could really see where they've gotten extremely high now in the Caribbean, especially in the northern and central part, and they're starting to spill now into the Gulf of Mexico, like I'm saying is going to happen over the next couple of months. And it's even starting to spread into the MDR region slowly but surely. Look at the CHI. So basically, this is the kind of like, you can think of this as like convection. So the green meaning higher amounts of convection, orange and that orangish red color meaning lower amounts of convection. You can see the timestamps on the right side of your screen here. So here we are at the beginning of July, but as we start to head into July 7th, look at the Caribbean, July 12th to 17th, and spreads over to the Atlantic. So towards the end of the month, we can see some higher amounts of convection, maybe more thunderstorms. And you can see as they all make their way, all these zones kind of shift east over time. But you can definitely see where we have more convection lining up over the next month or so. And I mean, I believe this last one is the 27th of July. I believe it's kind of cut off on the bottom. I assume that next one says, let me scroll down. Hey, there we go. Let's scroll down even more. There we go. Yeah, so here we have the 1st of August, even through mid-August, we have some potentially higher amounts of convection over the Gulf, the Caribbean, and potentially even the Atlantic as well. So, because Africa is where these tropical waves usually generate later on in the hurricane season. So this map is another concerning factor that I was looking at. And if we look at the wind shear, right now over the Caribbean, that's why it's pretty unfavorable. We have some higher shear there. But Gulf of Mexico, the East Coast, like on the coastline, I would say the wind shear is pretty low, but out in the Atlantic, it's still pretty high. So this is the one thing from El Nino that's really going to be hindering, because the dry air and the sea surface temperatures and the oceanic heat and all these other things have been lining up pretty good, but it's just that wind shear. So this might be a more rare El Nino where we still see a decently active hurricane season. Let's take a look at the 6th hurricane season forecast. Again, pretty much I haven't changed my forecast personally, and we still got the same amount, I think, as the last one, but you can see the average 14.73 for named storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes. I have my forecast still as 13 to 15 named storms, 5 to 8 hurricanes, and 1 to 3 major hurricanes. Because while I do think there's a lot of factors lining up, we still have to remember that we are in an El Nino and that there is going to be a good amount of wind shear for a good chunk of the hurricane season. But I would say an average hurricane season is likely, with potentially maybe go slightly below average or even slightly above average still, regardless of that El Nino. So definitely something to watch here. Of course, keep it here for updates. I am the Weather Dude signing off. Till next time, I'll catch you guys in the next video.